Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ismail Saka Arafi and I'm from Senu High School Dramagawan and I speak as the leader of opposition with motion that this house believe institutional reform on police rather than defund the police. Ladies and gentlemen, when we hear the institutional reform as stated by the Prime Minister, when we see that institutional reform is changing the internal affairs, not how the police see to the community. When we see institutional reform in internal affairs, it's not going to help to stem out the police brutality in the community surrounding it. So by using defund the police, we reallocate the fund from the police to education, to society, to social, to make sure there's no poverty, helping to get rid of poverty, problem in education, and etc. Because the entire illness of the crime rates is because there's poverty, there's low of education, low of employment. So by institutional reform or the status quo of the police, does it going to help? No, it is to hide the symptoms rather than to cure the illness itself. That's the point, and my counter argument with as the Prime Minister state and his arguments. The problem exists, of course, when we see the institutional reform with the idea of socialization of diversity. In United States, there's diversity in police department. There's still black chief exist, but the problem of police brutality still exists. So the problem is not about the idea of the institutional reform and status quo of all. Okay, the second argument of my argument and counter argument for the Prime Minister is that weapon and vehicle. So ladies and gentlemen, when we see in the United States 1033 programs that military hardware left over will be given to the police, MRAP for instance, 400 were given, much more MRAP vehicles, weapons, many more. The question is, how? Why? Why should the military hardware be given to the police? MRIP, mine anti-ambush vehicle. Why police should use that vehicle to stem out, to help for the civil servant, the community? Why the police is becoming soldier rather than civil servant? The question I saw said that we need more regulation to defund police. 1033 programs. The idea why we should use military hardware. Does it help to stem out the crime? No. Crime still rising, police brutality still exists. How? Why the idea of militarize the police is a good idea? Even in the Washington Post, which data in 60 years that even funding, the police is funding, increasing funding, use the military hardware to the police. It's not going to solve the crimes. As my argument that the entire illness of the crime is the indeedly lack of education and indeedly poverty. So by defund the police, I believe the idea of police brutality will be gone and the idea of crime rates will be lower as the idea of poverty and the lack of education will be solved. So ladies and gentlemen, in my end of my argument, ladies and gentlemen, my third argument is going to be what kind of institutional reform is that? Institutional reform for more like internal affairs, more control on the police. How does it help? That means that we change the police but not the police, to communicate to the people surrounding him as the civil servant. So by using defund the police, the idea is that it's not trying to make sure the police still stand, not to abolish it. As Prime Minister should know, we do not abolish the police. Police still stand as the idea to give them the rights of security to the community, but use the defund to help the social and education to stop the idea of the current illness of crime rates. You have to know the key word is, Prime Minister, not abolish the police. We are not abolish the police, okay? That needs to be underlined. So, ladies and gentlemen, the argument is that the police department should have funds that more relocated to another fund to help to do their job in solving the crime rates and etc. Not still giving them the weapon. It's not still giving them more internal affairs. Internal affairs still is done with more educational, more social reform in poverty, and most likely that this idea that how police will stand, I shall say, in the future of the police, leader of opposition and opposition team believe defund the police is a clear solution. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.